It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night where you could barely see your hand in front of your face. I was driving alone down a deserted road. The only company I had was the sound of the rain pelting against the windshield. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise coming from under the hood of my car. The engine sputtered and coughed before finally grinding to a halt. I cursed under my breath, realizing I was in trouble. I had no phone signal out in the middle of nowhere, and there was no sign of life for miles around. Just as I was about to step out of the car and assess the damage, a figure appeared out of the darkness. I squinted through the rain-soaked windshield, trying to make out who it was. The figure approached cautiously, their hoods pulled up over their heads. I could see the glint of a knife in their hand, and my heart rate quickened. I knew I was in danger, but I had to stay calm. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The person didn't say a word, but gestured for me to step out of the car. I hesitated for a moment, but the glint of the knife was enough to convince me to comply. I stepped out into the rain, feeling the cold droplets soak through my clothes. The person grabbed me roughly by the arm and demanded that I hand over all of my money. I frantically searched my pockets, pulling out a handful of crumpled bills and tossing them on the ground. "Please, just take it and leave me alone," I pleaded, my voice trembling. But the person wasn't satisfied with just my money. They lunged at me with the knife, and I knew I had no choice but to run for my life. I sprinted down the dark road, the rain making it difficult to see where I was going. I could hear the person behind me, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. I was terrified, knowing that they wanted to kill me for whatever reason. I could feel my breath hitching in my chest as I ran, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I knew I had to find help, but there was no one around to hear my cries for help. I pushed myself to run faster, knowing that my life depended on it. As the rain continued to pour down, I saw a faint light in the distance. My heart leaped with hope as I realized it was a shelter of some kind. I ran towards it, praying that I would find safety inside. But as I reached the door, it swung open to reveal the person with the knife standing in front of me, a sinister grin on their face. "You will not run from us," they said, their voice dripping with malice. "Get in the car." Fear gripped me as I realized that there was no escape. I had no choice but to comply, knowing that my life was in their hands. I got into the car, the interior smelling of dampness and decay. The person got in beside me, the knife still in their hand. I knew that I was at their mercy, and I could only hope that they would spare my life. They drove in silence, the only sound being the rain drumming against the roof of the car. I could feel their eyes on me, watching my every move. I knew that I was in grave danger, and that escape seemed impossible. Finally, the car came to a stop in a desolate area far from civilization. The person turned to me, their eyes cold and calculating. "Give me all of your money," they demanded, the knife glinting in the dim light of the car. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the last of my money, handing it over with trembling hands. "Please, just let me go," I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. But the person just laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think money will save you?" they sneered. "You should have known better than to travel alone at night. There is no escaping us now." I knew that my fate was sealed and that there was no hope of survival. I closed my eyes, preparing for the worst. But just as I braced myself for the final blow, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The person's eyes widened in fear as they realized that help was on the way. Without a second thought, they lunged out of the car and disappeared into the night, leaving me shaken but alive. As the police arrived to rescue me, I knew that I had narrowly escaped a horrifying fate. I shuddered to think of what could have happened if they had caught me. But as I drove away from that desolate place, I knew that I would never forget the terror of that night and the harrowing experience that had nearly cost me my life. It was a calm night as I drove towards my hometown to visit my parents. The road stretched out before me, illuminated only by my headlights and the occasional street lamp. I had been driving for hours, but I knew I was getting close. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was well past midnight. As I continued down the dark, winding road, I saw a figure up ahead. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I got closer, I realized it was a young girl standing by the side of the road. She looked no older than 16, with long, tangled hair and a worn-out jacket. Feeling a pang of compassion, I pulled over and rolled down my window. "Are you okay? Do you need any help?" I asked, concerned for her well-being. She looked at me with big, watery eyes and nodded slowly. I need a ride. Please, can you help me?" Without hesitation, I unlocked the passenger door and motioned for her to get in. She climbed into the seat beside me, shivering from the cold. I could see her hands trembling as she clasped them together in her lap. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. I tried to make small talk to ease the tension, asking her where she was headed and if she was from around here. But she remained silent, staring out the window as we drove on in the darkness. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine as I realized something was off about this situation. As we approached a deserted stretch of road, two shadows emerged from the bushes on either side. My heart skipped a beat as I saw two men dressed in dark clothing step out into the dim light. Panic set in as I realized what was happening. This was a setup and I was the target. "Drive! Go! Now!" the girl hissed, her voice sharp and urgent. I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward, tires screeching against the asphalt. I could hear the men shouting behind us, their footsteps pounding on the ground as they gave chase. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I focused on the road ahead, trying to put as much distance between us and our pursuers as possible. The girl beside me was gripping the door handle, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry, I didn't know," she stammered, her voice quivering. I didn't have time to respond. I had to concentrate on getting us out of this dangerous situation. I took a sharp turn down a side road, hoping to lose our attackers in the maze of streets. The girl clung to her seat as I navigated through the unfamiliar neighborhood, the street lights flickering overhead. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw the lights of a familiar landmark up ahead, the gas station where I used to stop on my way to visit my parents. I made a plan for it, praying that there would be someone there who could help us. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw a lone attendant inside, mopping the floor. I honked the horn and flashed my headlights, desperately trying to get his attention. He looked up, startled, as we screeched to a stop in front of the garage. Before I could even explain what was happening, the girl flung open the door and bolted out of the car, running towards the garage attendant with tears streaming down her face. "Please, help us. They're after us," she sobbed, pointing towards the road behind us. The attendant's eyes widened in shock as he saw the two men approaching in the distance. Without a second thought, he ushered us inside the garage, locking the door behind us. "Stay here, I'll call the police," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. We huddled together in the dimly lit garage, waiting anxiously for the sound of sirens in the distance. The girl clung to my arm, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I tried to reassure her that we were safe now, but my own heart was racing with fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we heard the wail of police sirens approaching. The garage door rumbled as it was lifted open, revealing a squad car pulling up outside. The officers quickly apprehended the two men who had been chasing us, leading them away in handcuffs. As the adrenaline began to fade, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We were safe. The girl looked at me with tearful eyes, gratitude shining in her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but sincere. I never did find out the girl's name or her story. But that night, our paths had crossed in an unexpected and dangerous way. And as I finally continued on my journey to visit my parents, I couldn't help but wonder about the events that had led us to that fateful encounter on a dark and lonely road in the dead of night. In a warm summer night in 1994, and I was driving my car down a deserted highway. The road stretched out before me, illuminated only by the dim glow of my headlights. As I passed by a gas station, I noticed a man standing by the side of the road, his thumb stuck out in the universal gesture of hitchhiking. Feeling a pang of sympathy for the stranger, I pulled over and rolled down my window. "Need a ride?" I called him out. The man approached my car, his features obscured by the shadows of the night. He nodded gratefully and climbed into the passenger seat. As he settled in, I caught a glimpse of his face. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, with a friendly smile and a disarming charm. We chatted amicably as we drove along the deserted highway, sharing stories and laughter in the darkness. The man introduced himself as Jake, a drifter who had been wandering the country for years. He spoke of his adventures and misadventures, weaving a tale of a life lived on the edge of society. As we neared the halfway point of our journey, Jake suddenly grew quiet. I glanced over at him, concerned, and saw a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. In an instant, everything changed. Jake pulled out a gun and pointed it at me, his smile replaced by a look of cold determination. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the danger I was in. I had picked up a stranger in the middle of the night, and now he was threatening my life. Panic surged through me, but I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I made a split-second decision. I reached out and grabbed the gun, wrestling with Jake in a desperate struggle for control. The car swerved dangerously on the paved road, the sound of screeching tires cutting through the night. With a final, desperate effort, I managed to overpower Jake, wrenching the gun from his grasp and throwing it aside. We both panted heavily, adrenaline still coursing through our veins as we stared at each other in the dim light of the car. "You picked the wrong person to mess with," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. Jake's eyes widened in fear as he realized the tables had turned. In a moment of clarity, he made a move to run, but I was faster. I lunged at him, tackling him to the ground and delivering a series of punishing blows. The fight was fierce and brutal, with the sound of our grunts and the scuffle echoing in the night. Despite his size and strength, I held my own against Jake, fueled by a primal instinct to survive. With every punch and kick, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a rush of power that pushed me to keep fighting, to keep pushing forward. After what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to subdue Jake, his body limp and bruised beneath me. With a deep breath, I gathered my strength and dragged him to the trunk of the car, his unconscious form slumping against the metal. I slammed the trunk shut, the sound echoing in the empty night. I took a moment to catch my breath, my heart still racing from the adrenaline of the fight. But there was no time to waste. I climbed back into the driver's seat, my hands shaking slightly as I started the engine. With a determined glint in my eye, I hit the gas and sped off into the darkness, leaving the gas station. I drove for a half hour before I found police.